On day 12, I walked to my fence line and looked east. 47 dock structures standing on dry ground. 18 marina slips on exposed lake bed. 2 boats resting on their keels where water used to be. The community beach, closed. The clubhouse deck overlooking pale gray mud, stretching 60 feet to the waterline. 200 families. $144 million in assessed lakefront premium. Built against a dam my father closed in 1958. They never asked who controlled the gates. The HOA president was a former real estate attorney. He fought for months. Prescriptive easement, riparian rights, federal navigable waters. 4 legal arguments. He was confident, prepared, and wrong about every single one. The judge asked one question. "Do you hold any recorded instrument?" He said no. His resignation letter posted 9 days later. The new president called me at 8 the next morning. She said, "I read the license. 5 words. That's all it took. We recorded the agreement in 68 days. All right, before we get started, comment where you're watching from, smash that like button, and hit subscribe for more amazing stories." The staff gauge at the upstream face of Greer Dam had been reading the same number for 67 years. Not the same number every morning. The reservoir rose and fell with Greer Creek's seasonal pulse, climbing through the spring runoff and dropping through the late summer base flow before the autumn rains brought it back. But the same number at normal operating pool, 38 feet, the overflow elevation his father had set when he designed the Morning Glory Spillway in 1957, and the number that had governed every gate operation, every inspection, every maintenance decision, and every maintenance log entry since the state had issued Dam Operating License DOL-1958-003 in the spring of 1959. Walter had read the gauge this morning at 6:15 a.m. It said 38 feet. He had written it in the maintenance log at the kitchen table afterward, set the log beside the State Dam Safety Office's scheduling notice that had arrived 4 days ago, and had called Clara Venn at 8. She had said, "I'll review the license and the parcel records and call you tomorrow morning." He had said, "I'll be at the dam at 6:15. She had said, "I'll call at 8. He was waiting for 8. The Greer family had acquired the 1,400-acre parcel in 1947, Walter's grandfather's purchase, a cattle and timber property in the county's western range, whose central geographic feature was Greer Creek, a perennial stream fed by 4 springs in the ridge system to the north, running south and east through the property's center before widening at the natural basin, where the valley floor flattened and the creek's gradient eased for approximately 1,000 feet. His grandfather had recognized the basin's potential on the first survey, the valley floor's geometry, the bedrock outcrops at the valley walls that would form natural abutments, the creek's measured flow that the County Extension Service's hydrology records confirmed as sufficient for a substantial impoundment. He had not built the dam. He had ranched the property, logged its timber on a sustained yield rotation, and passed it to Walter's father in 1954, with the basin annotated on the survey plat and the hydrological notes filed in the purchase records. His father had built the dam in 1958. The decision had been 3 years in the planning, his father consulting the state's agricultural engineering office, reviewing the county's water use records, having a civil engineer draw the embankment geometry and the spillway design, and applying for the construction permit in 1956. The dam that resulted was a 52-foot compacted earthen embankment, the fill material excavated from the basin's eastern margin and compacted in 12-inch lifts using a rented sheep's foot roller. The embankment keyed into the valley's granite bedrock at both abutments with a concrete cutoff wall extending 8 feet below the original stream bed. The crest ran 420 feet across the valley floor, longer than necessary for the valley's width, the additional length his father's conservatism against the possibility of seismic settlement. The concrete Morning Glory Spillway was set into the embankment's north abutment, the overflow elevation at 38 feet on the staff gauge, the inlet's trumpet bell, designed to pass the 100-year storm inflow at the overflow elevation without overtopping the embankment. The spillway's discharge channel ran north along the abutment face to the downstream channel 60 feet below the crest. The 2 sluice gates were set in the south abutment. Gate A, a 42-inch cast-iron sluice gate, the primary flow control gate, operated by hand wheel from the inspection walkway at the embankment crest. Gate B, a 30-inch cast-iron sluice gate set 14 inches lower in the abutment face, the emergency bypass for rapid drawdown beyond Gate A's discharge capacity. Both gates discharge through concrete-lined conduits to the downstream channel below the dam. Gate A, at quarter-open position, discharged approximately 1,800 gallons per minute at normal operating pool head, sufficient to draw the reservoir at approximately 7 inches per day across the 480-acre surface. Both gates, fully open, discharged approximately 5,600 gallons per minute, sufficient to draw the reservoir at approximately 22 inches per day. His father had completed the embankment in October 1958, closed both gates, and watched Greer Creek begin filling the basin. The reservoir had reached its first normal operating pool, 38 feet on the staff gauge, in April 1959, after the winter's snowpack runoff had filled the basin through its first season. The State Dam Safety Office had conducted the completion inspection in May 1959 and had issued Dam Operating License DOL-1958-003 the following week, the license number reflecting its position in the state's registry as the third dam operating license issued in the county since the licensing system's establishment in 1955. It was the oldest active dam operating license in the county. The two licenses issued before it had been decommissioned, one dam removed in 1978, one impoundment drained and abandoned in 1991. DOL-1958-003 had been current and active for 67 years. Walter had been 9 years old when the dam was completed. He had been at the basin with his father in October 1958 when the final gate was closed and the creek's impoundment had begun, standing at the downstream toe, watching the water level in the stilling basin stop dropping and hold as the gates engaged, his father's hand on his shoulder, both of them watching the creek upstream begin its slow rise against the new embankment. His father had said, "That's your water now, too. Keep it right, and it'll be here when you're old." Walter had been 9. He had not fully understood the engineering. He had understood the weight of the sentence. He had come to understand the engineering in the following 30 years. A civil engineering degree from the State University in 1974, 4 years of graduate study in hydraulics and hydrology, and 37 years as a hydraulic engineer and licensed dam safety officer with the state's Water Infrastructure Division, conducting Class A, B, and C dam inspections, writing the state's updated Class B inspection protocol in 2001, and testifying as an expert witness in 14 dam safety proceedings. He had retired in 2021 at 71, returned to the ranch full-time, and had maintained the dam with the same disciplined rigor he had applied to every professional inspection: the daily gauge readings, the quarterly gate function tests, the annual embankment inspection with the state's current protocol as the checklist, the maintenance log entries in the continuous hardbound series his father had started in 1959. Dam Operating License DOL-1958-003's operative provisions were specific and had not materially changed through 2 renewals. The licensed operator section stated that the license was issued to the record owner of the dam parcel as the sole licensed operator, that the sole licensed operator held exclusive authority and responsibility over all gate operations and water level management, and that no other person could direct or perform gate operations without the licensed operator's written authorization and the State Dam Safety Office's prior notification. The maintenance drawdown requirement specified that every 7 years, the licensed operator was required to draw the reservoir to a minimum inspection pool level, 33 feet on the staff gauge, 5 feet below normal operating pool, to allow the state inspector to examine the embankment's upstream face, the gate assembly's seals and conduit linings, and the downstream toe's seepage conditions. The 2009 renewal had added the 30-day advance written notification requirement for adjacent property owners, consistent with the state's updated dam safety regulations applicable to all Class A impoundments. The reservoir's hydrology was documented in Walter's maintenance log from 1984 forward, and in the State Hydrology Office's gauging records from 1948. Greer Creek's mean annual inflow to the basin was approximately 11,200 acre-feet per year, the 4 spring sources providing a drought-resistant base flow that the county's 2008 groundwater study had identified as one of the most reliable perennial flow systems in the county's western range. At mean annual inflow, the reservoir's net water balance after evaporative losses ran a surplus of approximately 8,400 acre-feet per year, the surplus passing through the Morning Glory spillway during the high pool periods of March through June. The reservoir had never dropped below 35 feet on the staff gauge in a drought year, the Four Springs base flow maintaining the pool through the 1988, 2002, and 2021 drought years that had stressed every other surface water system in the county. At normal operating pool, the reservoir covered 480 acres. The maximum depth at the dam face was 42 feet. The eastern arm extended 2.4 miles from the dam face, the arm narrowing as it ran east into the basin's upper reach. The full 480-acre surface at normal operating pool was contained within Walter's 1,400-acre parcel. No portion of the water surface extending onto any adjacent property when the reservoir was at or below its overflow elevation. This was the physical and legal fact that Clearwater Communities had not verified in 2001, when they had graded 200 lakefront lots against the reservoir's eastern and northeastern shoreline. Clearwater Communities had acquired the 800-acre parcel immediately east of Walters in 1999, a former cattle ranch whose western boundary ran along the county assessor's line, forming the eastern boundary of the Greer parcel. The development site plan, filed with the county planning department in early 2001 and available in the county's public records, had shown 200 residential lots arranged along the reservoir's eastern and northeastern shoreline, each lot with a private dock easement extending to the water's edge. The lot sizes ranging from 0.35 to 1.4 acres, with the lakefront premium reflected throughout. The community's common area, a 22-acre parcel, had incorporated a full-service marina at the common area's southern end, a community beach at the common area's center, and a waterfront clubhouse whose deck had been designed to sit at the elevation appropriate to a reservoir at 38 feet on the staff gauge. The development had been marketed as Lakeview Commons, 200 luxury lakefront residences on a pristine private reservoir, the finest master-planned lakefront community in the region. Walter had read the planning department's conditional use permit notice in the county paper in February 2001. He had driven to the planning department and had reviewed the site plan at the public records counter. He had looked at the 200-lot configurations, the marina's 60-slip layout, the community beach's designated swimming area, the clubhouse's waterfront deck. He had noted that the marina's slip depths had been designed against the reservoir at 38 feet. 18 of the slips in the marina's northeastern section were in shallower water, whose navigable depth at 33 feet would be marginal or insufficient. He had looked at the community beach's swimming area and had noted that its designated depth range was calibrated to 38 feet. At 33 feet, the beach would be a mudflat extending 40 to 60 feet beyond the current waterline. He had looked at the clubhouse deck and had noted its cantilevered elevation above the current shoreline bank. At 33 feet, the deck would overlook exposed lakebed rather than water. He had not been contacted by Clearwater Communities. No instrument had been presented to him. No reservoir use agreement had been proposed. No engineer representing the developer had reviewed DOL-1958-003 at the State Dam Safety Office's public records portal, or if they had not communicated the license's implications to anyone with authority to negotiate with Walter. He had called his attorney, a property and water law practitioner named Gerald Marsh, who had handled the Greer family's legal matters since 1971. In March 2001, after the conditional use permit had been approved and the grading crews had arrived on the adjacent parcel, Gerald had reviewed the situation and had said, "The same choice as always. Act now and stop the development before the homes are built, or document and wait until the HOA is formed and negotiate with the entity that will hold the agreement in perpetuity." He had said, "The developer has 200 lots to sell. If you act now, you have leverage. If you wait until the homes are built and sold, you have a court action against a community of 200 households who bought in good faith." Walter had thought about it for 3 weeks. He had walked the dam each morning, read the gauge, looked east across the reservoir toward the grading activity visible on the adjacent parcel's western margin. He had thought about what his father had said in 1958, "Keep it right, and it'll be here when you're old." He had thought about what keeping it right meant, not just the embankment and the gates and the spillway, but the legal relationship between the dam and everyone who built against its water. He had called Gerald back and had said, "I'll document and wait. The development will be complete in 3 years. The HOA will be formed. I'll negotiate with the HOA." Gerald had said, "Document everything from today forward." Walter had said, "I always do." He had written the entry in the maintenance log that evening. March 2001. Clearwater Community's construction commenced on adjacent eastern parcel. Site plan: 200 lakefront lots, marina 60 slips, community beach, waterfront clubhouse. No reservoir use agreement presented or proposed. No contact from developer. Decision: document and defer negotiation until HOA formation. Reservoir: normal pool, 38 feet. Gate A, closed. Gate B, closed. DOL-1958-003, current. The development had been completed between 2002 and 2005. The 200 homes had sold at prices ranging from $590,000 to $940,000. The blended average, $720,000. The lakefront premium, the dominant value driver in every appraisal. The marina had opened in 2003. 60 slips, a fuel dock, a pump-out station, a harbormaster's office. The community beach had opened the same summer. The waterfront clubhouse had opened in 2004. The Lakeview Commons HOA had formed in 2003 and had received the 22-acre common area parcel from Clearwater Communities in 2005 when the last lot sold. A conveyance deed describing the marina, the beach, and the clubhouse as permanent community infrastructure, without a single reference to dam operating license, DOL-1958-003, or the maintenance drawdown requirement that would reduce the reservoir by 5 feet every 7 years. Walter had updated the maintenance log in 2005. HOA formed. Common area conveyed. No reservoir use agreement recorded. No contact from HOA. Decision: maintain current posture. Next maintenance drawdown. 2012 per license schedule. He had conducted the 2012 drawdown. Gate A opened. The reservoir drawn to 33 feet over 25 days. The inspection completed. The marina's 18 shallow slips dry for the inspection period. The community beach closed. The clubhouse deck overlooking the exposed lake bed for the 5-day minimum inspection period. Giving the HOA 14 days informal advance notice. Insufficient under the 2009 renewal's 30-day requirement, but consistent with his practice before the requirement's full applicability to his license cycle. The HOA had not contacted him during the drawdown. The 2019 drawdown had been conducted under full compliance with the 30-day notification requirement. The HOA's management company had acknowledged receipt. The board had sent a letter of protest, and Walter had replied with a copy of the license's maintenance schedule. No legal action had followed. He had noted in the 2019 maintenance log entry, "Drawdown complete. HOA notified 30 days advance per 2009 renewal conditions. Board protest letter received. Replied with license schedule documentation. No legal action. No agreement proposed. Next maintenance drawdown, 2026. Margin note. Negotiate agreement before 2026 drawdown." He had underlined the margin note twice. He had not negotiated before the 2026 drawdown. The years had moved the way years moved on a working ranch. The daily gauge readings, the quarterly gate tests, the annual embankment inspections, the maintenance log entries, each year's annual summary closing with the same 4 words his father had first written in 1959, when he had noted the absence of any downstream use agreement. No reservoir use agreement. 22 years of that entry. From 2001 through 2025, the 4 words running like a continuous thread through the log's pages. The State Dam Safety Office's scheduling notice had arrived on a Thursday in March 2026. Walter had read it at the kitchen table. The standard inspection scheduling form, the proposed drawdown window in June 2026, the reminder of the 30-day adjacent property owner notification requirement, the assigned inspector's name, James Witt, Western District Senior Inspector. He had set the notice beside the maintenance log's current volume, open to the 2025 annual summary, the last line reading, "No reservoir use agreement," and had looked at the margin note from 2019, "Negotiate agreement before 2026 drawdown," underlined twice, unactioned. He had called Clara Venn on Friday morning. Gerald Marsh had retired in 2018 and had given Walter her name as the one attorney in the region he trusted with the dam operating license dispute. Walter had briefed her in 2019 after the drawdown, the license, the maintenance log, the HOA's protest letter, the absence of an agreement, his intent to negotiate before the next cycle. She had reviewed the file and had said, "When you're ready, this is a straightforward case with significant consequences." He had said, "I'll be ready before 2026. She had said, "Call me when you are." He had called her on Friday. She had said, "Send me the license, the full maintenance log, the 2019 HOA correspondence, and the state scheduling notice. I'll review everything tonight and call you tomorrow morning." He had gone to the dam at 6:15 this morning, the March light coming up pale and cool, Greer Creek audible in the upstream basin at its early spring volume, the reservoir surface still and dark at 38 feet on the staff gauge. He had read the gauge, written it in the log, and had stood on the inspection walkway looking east across the 480-acre surface toward the Lakeview Commons development. The marina's dock structure visible at the common area's southern end, the community beach's shoreline, the 200 dock structures running along the eastern and northeastern arm, the roof lines of the nearest homes set back behind their sloped lakefront lots. 200 households, $720,000 average, 22 years of lake living built against water that existed because his father had compacted an earthen embankment in 1958, and because Walter had kept the gates closed ever since. He had gone back to the house and had made coffee, and had opened the maintenance log to the current page, and looked at the margin note from 2019. He had picked up his pen and had written beside it, in the current date's entry, "Scheduling notice received, Clara Venn retained, demand letter to follow, drawdown notification to follow if demand rejected, matter to be resolved before Gate A opens." The phone rang at 8 o'clock. He picked it up. Clara said, "I've read the license and the maintenance log and the parcel records. Walter, this is the oldest active dam license in the county. Are you ready to hear what it says and what it means for 200 households who've never read it?" He said, "I've been ready since 2001. She said, "Then here is where we start." The developer's marketing materials had called it the lake with the same possessive confidence Walter had seen in every lakefront development brochure he had read in 41 years of dam safety work. Clearwater Communities had distributed the Lakeview Commons marketing package at the Regional Home Expo in the spring of 2001, a full-color brochure whose cover photograph was an aerial image of the reservoir's eastern arm at normal operating pool, the water blue and still, the undeveloped shoreline where the 200 lots would be graded, showing the pale grass, and the oak canopy of the adjacent parcel before the grading crews had touched it. The tagline across the bottom of the cover read, "Lakeview Commons, 200 luxury lakefront residences, your lake, your life." The brochure's interior had listed the community's amenities in the confident language of a developer who had decided that the water's presence was geography, rather than an operational decision made by a neighbor with 2 gate wheels and a license that predated every residential development in the county. Full-service 60-slip marina with fuel dock and harbor master services. Private community beach with designated swimming area and seasonal lifeguard. Waterfront clubhouse with 4,200 square foot lakeside deck. Private dock easement with every lot. The most complete lakefront lifestyle in the region. Walter had kept the brochure. It was in the Water Systems file behind the tab labeled Clearwater Communities / Lakeview Commons HOA 2001 onward. Filed beside the County Planning Department's conditional use permit notice, the site plan he had reviewed at the public records counter in February 2001, and the maintenance log entry from March 2001, noting the construction's commencement and the absence of any reservoir use agreement. He had added to the file every year since. The HOA's annual meeting notices when they appeared in the county's public notice postings, the forum posts that reached him through adjacent neighbors who followed the development's social media presence, the newspaper features, the insurance dimension documents he had assembled, starting in 2014, when he had begun thinking seriously about what a drawdown would mean for 200 households whose financial exposure ran deeper than their property values. The construction had taken 4 years in its full build-out. The grading crews had worked the eastern and northeastern shoreline from the summer of 2001 through the autumn of 2002, terracing the 200 lots against the reservoir's contour, the excavated material forming the lot pads and the internal road subgrade. The marina had been constructed at the common area's southern end in 2002 and 2003, a concrete dock system with 60 slips arranged in 6-finger piers. The slip depths designed against the reservoir at 38 feet, the fuel dock and pump-out station at the marina's outer end, the harbor master's office at the shore connection, the 18 slips in the marina's northeastern section, the section closest to the reservoir's shallower northeastern arm, had been designed with a minimum operational depth of 5.5 feet at 38-foot pool. At 33 feet, 5 feet below normal pool, those 18 slips would have approximately 0.5 feet of water, effectively dry, the boats that use them resting on exposed lake bed or relocated before the drawdown reached the critical level. The community beach had been constructed at the common area's center, a graded sand beach extending 180 feet along the shoreline. The swimming area designated by buoy markers set at the depth range appropriate to 38-foot pool. At 33 feet, the buoy line would be sitting over exposed mudflat, the swimming area's inner boundary 50 feet from the new water line, the beach extending from its original shoreline edge, across what had been the swimming area's floor to the receded water line. The County Health Department's beach operation permit required a minimum water depth of 3.5 feet at the buoy line's inner boundary. At 33 feet, the depth at that location would be approximately 1.2 feet. The beach permit would be automatically suspended when the depth fell below the minimum. The waterfront clubhouse had been constructed on the common area's northeastern corner in 2003 and 2004, a 6,800 square foot structure with the 4,200 square foot lakeside deck cantilevered over the shoreline bank. The deck's elevation set to place its surface 4 feet above the waterline at 38-foot pool. At 33-foot pool, the deck would be 9 feet above the waterline, overlooking the exposed mudflat margin that would extend 60 to 80 feet from the original shoreline to the receded waterline at the 34 most severely affected lots in the northeastern arm. The 200 homes had sold between 2002 and 2005. The sales prices had ranged from $588,000 for the smallest interior position lot on the southern arm to $944,000 for the largest corner lot on the northeastern arm's far end. The blended average $720,000. The county assessor's office had established the development's assessed values at a rate that the assessor's notes described as reflecting premium lakefront access, private dock infrastructure, marina proximity, and community beach access as the primary value drivers. The aggregate assessed value of the 200 parcels attributable to lakefront premium was $144 million. Walter had calculated the figure from the assessor's public records in 2019, when he had first assembled the insurance dimension file, and had updated it in 2025 using the current assessed values, $168 million in lakefront premium, built against a reservoir level controlled by his gates and supported by no recorded legal instrument. The insurance dimension was what distinguished this story from a straightforward property dispute. Walter had begun thinking about it seriously in 2014, the year a neighboring county's dam licensing dispute had resulted in a published state appellate court opinion noting that homeowners' insurance policies and flood insurance policies written against properties adjacent to licensed private impoundments carried an undisclosed material risk when no reservoir use agreement existed in the deed records. He had obtained copies of 3 Lakeview Commons homeowners policies through a public records request related to an unconnected property matter. The policies were not confidential in the context of the request, and had read the water damage and flood coverage provisions. Each policy's flood coverage had been written under the National Flood Insurance Program, whose underwriting incorporated the property's flood zone designation. The flood zone designation for the Lakeview Commons parcels had been established in 2003 based on the reservoir at normal operating pool. The NFIP's mapping had treated the reservoir as a stable geographic feature whose level was fixed, not as a managed impoundment whose level could be reduced by 5 feet every 7 years under a mandatory license requirement. If the NFIP's mapping had incorporated the drawdown schedule, the flood zone designation and the corresponding insurance premium structure for the affected parcels would have been different. He had filed the insurance dimension analysis in the water systems folder in 2014 and had added to it each year the NFIP mapping update notices, the State Insurance Commissioner's 2018 guidance on material disclosure obligations for properties adjacent to licensed impoundments, the 3 comparable cases in other states where the absence of a recorded reservoir use agreement had triggered insurance coverage disputes following a drawdown. The file was 17 pages by 2026. He had given Clara the full file with the license and the maintenance log. The HOA's 22 years of forum posts and annual meeting minutes had treated the lake with the institutional certainty of an organization that had never questioned the water's legal basis. Walter had obtained the annual meeting minutes through the county's HOA registration records, which required HOA associations to file their annual meeting minutes with the county clerk. He had read them each year. The language was consistent across 22 years. The lake described as the community's primary amenity. The marina's seasonal opening and closing noted as routine community events. The beach's lifeguard schedule approved each spring. The clubhouse deck's seasonal furniture installation noted each April. The minutes had never mentioned dam operating license, DOL-1958-003. The minutes had never mentioned Walter Greer. The minutes had never mentioned a reservoir use agreement. The lake had been treated as infrastructure the HOA owned, maintained, and had an unquestioned right to rely on. Robert Hale had been elected HOA president in 2020, the 4th president in the HOA's history, and the most consequential. He was a former real estate attorney who had practiced property and title law for 18 years before retiring to Lakeview Commons in 2015. He had purchased a lot on the northeastern arm, Unit 147, one of the larger corner lots, his dock one of the 34 that would lose navigable access at 33-foot pool. His legal background had made him an effective HOA president. He understood CC and RS. He understood easement law. He understood HOA governance, and he communicated with the confidence of a person who believed he understood property law well enough to protect his community against any legal challenge. He had appeared in a regional lifestyle magazine feature in 2021, Lakeview Commons, the region's premier lakefront master plan, in which he had described the community's amenities, its governance model, and its lake with the fluent certainty of a retired real estate attorney who had never seen a dam operating license. The magazine had photographed him on the clubhouse deck, the reservoir at 38 feet behind him, the marina visible to the south. He had said, "This community was built on this lake. The lake is our infrastructure, our amenity, our identity. 20 years of stewardship have made Lakeview Commons what it is, and that stewardship doesn't stop." He had appeared in a local news feature in 2023 about the HOA's shoreline restoration planting project, native plantings along the eastern shoreline, a board initiative Robert had led and funded through a special community assessment. He had been interviewed at the marina dock and had said, "The lake is a living system. We take responsibility for it. Every plant we put in that shoreline is an investment in what this lake means to this community." He had given a speech at the community's 20th anniversary celebration in October 2023. 200 families on the marina dock, string lights over the water, the reservoir at 38 feet behind him. Walter had not attended. He had read the speech summary in the county paper's community section the following week. Robert had said, 20 years ago, this lake was an empty basin, waiting to become what it is now. We built this community around this water. We built our lives here. This lake is ours, and it will be ours for the next 20 years, and the 20 after that. The paper had run the photograph of Robert at the marina dock, the reservoir full behind him, the 200 dock structures visible along the eastern arm. Walter had read the speech at the kitchen table, and had looked at the maintenance log open beside the paper. The 2023 annual summary, closing as always with 4 words. He had set the paper down. He had called Clara and had said, "The HOA president gave a speech at their 20th anniversary last month. He said the lake is theirs." She had said, "Is he the former real estate attorney?" Walter had said yes. She had said, "That's going to make the demand letter more interesting." He had said, "Write it anyway." The state's scheduling notice had arrived in March 2026. Clara had reviewed the full file overnight. DOL-1958-003, 42 years of maintenance log, the 2019 HOA correspondence, the insurance dimension file, the annual meeting minutes, the assessor's value records, the marketing brochure. She had called at 8 the next morning and had said, "The demand letter has 6 components, not 4. The license, the maintenance log, the absence of any recorded instrument, the 22-year unauthorized use, the insurance dimension, the NFIP mapping exposure, and the State Insurance Commissioner's 2018 guidance, and the drawdown consequences at the 47 affected lots, the 18 marina slips, and the community beach. I want all 6 in the letter, because Robert Hale is a real estate attorney who is going to read this letter as a lawyer, not as a frightened HOA president, and I want every legal dimension visible before he decides how to respond." Walter had said, "Send it." The demand letter had gone out the following Monday, 14 pages, certified mail to the HOA's registered agent, to Robert Hale individually as HOA president, and to the HOA's management company. The letter's demand had 2 components: a recorded reservoir use agreement negotiated at fair compensation, reflecting 22 years of unauthorized beneficial use, and the ongoing right being conveyed, and a maintenance cost-share agreement incorporating the dam's 7-year drawdown schedule into the HOA's planning and financial framework. Response deadline, 30 days. Consequence of rejection. Formal 30-day drawdown notification issued the same day to all 200 unit owners individually. Gate A opened on the state's inspection schedule, and the reservoir use enforcement action filed simultaneously in County District Court. Clara had added 1 paragraph near the letter's close that she had read to Walter before sending. The maintenance drawdown required by DOL-1958-003 will reduce the reservoir's surface elevation by 5 feet from its normal operating pool. At that level, 47 of the 200 Lakeview Commons lakefront lots will lose navigable dock access. The marina's 18 northeastern slips will be non-operational. The Community Beaches County Health Permit will be automatically suspended due to depth conditions, and the waterfront clubhouse deck will overlook exposed lake bed rather than water. Mortgage lenders, homeowners insurance carriers, and NFIP flood insurance underwriters holding policies and loans on affected properties may consider the existence and schedule of this mandatory drawdown to be material information. The licensed operator notes that the State Insurance Commissioner's 2018 guidance specifically identifies the absence of a recorded reservoir use agreement for properties adjacent to licensed private impoundments as a material disclosure item under state insurance law. Walter had said, "You put the insurance carriers in the letter." Clara had said, "Robert Hale knows mortgage lender exposure from his real estate practice. He may be prepared for that argument. He has never thought about the NFIP mapping exposure or the State Insurance Commissioner's guidance. Those are the 2 dimensions he won't have a ready answer for, and they're the 2 dimensions that affect every single one of the 200 households, not just the 47 in the drawdown exposure zone." He had said, "Send it." She had sent it on a Monday. Walter had gone to the dam that afternoon and had read the gauge, 38 feet, normal operating pool, both gates closed, and had stood on the inspection walkway looking east across the 480-acre surface. The marina's dock structure was visible at the far end of the southern arm, the 60 slips in their finger pier arrangement, the harbor master's office at the shore connection. He had looked at Gate A's hand wheel beside him, the same cast iron wheel his father had installed in 1958, the same mechanism that had held the reservoir at 38 feet for 67 years. 30 days for the HOA to respond. Then the notification, then 30 more days to Gate A. He had written in his field notebook and had gone home and transferred the entry to the maintenance log. Demand letter delivered. Response deadline, 30 days. Clara Venn, Counsel of Record. DOL-1958-003. Current. Reservoir, normal pool, 38 feet. Gate A, closed. Gate B, closed. No reservoir use agreement, yet. He had underlined yet once. It was the first time in 22 years of annual summaries that the 4 words had carried a qualification. Clara had pulled the full license chain on a Thursday evening. The State Dam Safety Office's public records portal carried the complete filing history for DOL-1958-003. The original 1959 issuance, the 1969 5-year confirmation inspection, the 1979 10-year inspection, the 1984 operator transfer from Walter's father to Walter, the 1994 renewal, the 2009 renewal under the updated Class A impoundment regulations, and the current 2026 inspection scheduling notice. She had pulled each document and had read them in sequence, building the license's legal architecture from its 1959 foundation forward. The 1959 issuance was 12 pages in the state's original format. The licensed operator section stated, Dam Operating License DOL-1958-003 is issued to Harold T. Greer as the licensed operator of record for Greer Dam. The licensed operator holds sole authority and responsibility for all gate operations, water level management, and maintenance activities associated with the dam structure and reservoir impoundment. No person other than the licensed operator or the licensed operator's authorized designee may adjust the gate assemblies or alter the reservoir's operating level without the licensed operator's written authorization and without prior notification to the State Dam Safety Office. The provision had been restated verbatim in the 1994 and 2009 renewals, each restatement adding the then current licensed operator's name and credentials to the record. The 1984 operator transfer had added Walter's credentials, his civil engineering degree, his professional engineer's license number, his dam safety inspection certification at the Class A level, the highest classification in the state's system, applicable to impoundments exceeding 400 acres of surface area or 40 feet of maximum depth. Greer Reservoir qualified on both parameters. The transfer document had noted that the incoming licensed operator's professional qualifications exceeded the minimum requirements for a Class A license by a substantial margin, a notation the state's inspector had added outside the standard form language. The 2009 renewal had been the most operationally significant document in the chain. The renewal that had brought DOL-1958-003 into conformance with the state's updated Class A dam safety regulations, effective 2008. 3 new operating conditions had been added: the emergency action plan requirement, the minimum liability insurance coverage requirement, and the 30-day advance written notification requirement for adjacent property owners before any maintenance drawdown, the notice to specify the drawdown start date, expected pool reduction, duration, and the license provision requiring it. Clara had set the documents in sequence on her conference table and had written her findings in the same format she used for every case: instrument, operative provisions, gaps, exposure. The gaps were complete. No reservoir use agreement in the county deed records between Walter Greer and the Lakeview Commons HOA or any predecessor. No easement on Walter's parcel. No water right held by the HOA. No instrument of any kind, not a letter of intent, not a memorandum of understanding, not an informal written acknowledgement, establishing any legal basis for 200 lakefront properties' dependence on a reservoir level set by one licensed operator. She had called Walter at 8 Friday morning and had read him the findings. He had said, "That's what Gerald told me in 2001. She had said, "Gerald was right then, and the findings are the same now, compounded by 22 years. The demand letter goes out Monday." Robert Hale had received the demand letter on a Wednesday. Walter knew this because Dale Ingram, a rancher whose property sat north of Walter's along the ridge, and who had been watching the Lakeview Commons development with the interested attention of a neighbor for 22 years, had called Walter Thursday evening and had said, "I was at the county planning office today, and ran into a woman from the HOA's management company pulling parcel records at the public terminal. She had a copy of your demand letter with her, and she was on her phone the whole time. Walter had said, "I know." Dale had said, "The former attorney president, is he going to fight this?" Walter had said, "Yes." Dale had said, "Does he have a case?" Walter had said, "Ask me in 30 days." Robert had called the HOA's outside counsel, a property and litigation firm in the county seat named Aldridge and Marsh, within 24 hours of receiving the letter. But he had not waited for outside counsel to draft the response. He had sat down at his desk the evening the letter arrived, and had written a 12-page legal response himself, in the format of a demand response letter, drawing on 18 years of real estate law practice. He had then sent it to Aldridge and Marsh with a cover note: "Review, revise as needed, and send on firm letterhead. I've done the substantive work." Clara had received the letter, on Aldridge and Marsh letterhead, signed by a partner named Vincent Aldridge, on day 16 of the 30-day response window. She had called Walter that afternoon and had said, "The response is here. It's more sophisticated than anything I've seen from an HOA in a dam dispute. The real estate attorney drafted it himself and handed it to outside counsel to sign. I want to walk you through it because you need to understand what he's arguing before the board meeting." Walter had said, "Read it to me." The response ran 4 arguments. The first was the implied easement and established use claim Clara had anticipated: 22 years of continuous community use, the developer's reasonable reliance on the water surface at the time of construction, the HOA as a good faith successor. The second was a prescriptive easement theory grounded in the HOA's open, notorious, continuous, and hostile use of the reservoir's water surface for 22 years without the licensed operator's permission. Robert had cited 3 state court decisions recognizing prescriptive easements in water surface use contexts. The third was a riparian rights argument that the Lakeview Commons parcels, as land adjacent to the reservoir's shoreline, held common law riparian rights to reasonable use of the water surface that were not extinguished by the licensed operator's authority under the dam safety statute. The fourth, and the one Clara had flagged, was a federal navigable waters argument that Greer Reservoir, as a body of water used for recreational navigation by 200 households over 22 years, had acquired the character of a navigable water under federal doctrine, and that the licensed operator's authority over a federally navigable water was subject to federal preemption, specifically the Army Corps of Engineers jurisdiction under Section 10 of the Rivers and Harbors Act. Walter had been quiet for a moment after Clara finished reading the fourth argument. Then he had said, "He's invoking federal navigable waters on a private reservoir." Clara had said, "It's the most creative argument in the letter and the least likely to succeed, but it's not frivolous on its face. A private impoundment used for recreational navigation by a significant number of households over an extended period has been argued, unsuccessfully in every case I'm aware of, to have acquired navigable character under federal doctrine. He knows it's a long shot. He's putting it in the letter because it requires a federal agency response, which delays the proceeding and shifts the cost burden." Walter had said, "Can he win on the prescriptive easement theory?" Clara had said, "No. Prescriptive easement requires open, notorious, continuous, hostile, and uninterrupted use for the statutory period. The hostile element requires use without the owner's permission and without the owner's acquiescence. Your maintenance log documents continuous reservation of rights from 2001 through 2025. The 2012 and 2019 drawdowns, conducted on your schedule under your license without asking the HOA's permission, are acts inconsistent with acquiescence. A licensed operator who draws his reservoir down 5 feet on his own maintenance schedule, regardless of the HOA's preference, is not acquiescing in a prescriptive claim. The prescriptive theory fails on the hostile element." Clara had said, "The riparian rights argument fails because this state's dam safety statute expressly addresses the relationship between the licensed operator's authority and adjacent property owners' water surface claims. The statute's preemption provision covers common law riparian claims with respect to licensed Class A impoundments." Robert knows riparian doctrine from his real estate practice. He doesn't know the dam safety statute's preemption provision because it's not in the property law materials he studied. Walter had said, "What about the federal argument?" She had said, "We request the Army Corps' position." They'll respond within 30 days. The response will say that Greer Reservoir is a private, non-navigable impoundment. It's not connected to any navigable waterway. It has no commercial navigation use, and private recreational use by a residential community does not confer navigable character under federal doctrine. The Corps' response ends that argument, but it takes 30 days, and it adds a federal agency to the record, which strengthens our position considerably when the court sees that two agencies, the State Dam Safety Office and the Army Corps, have both confirmed the licensed operator's authority. Walter had said, he wrote this letter himself. Clara had said, yes. 18 years of real estate practice, and he drafted a 4-argument response to a dam operating license dispute. He's the most dangerous antagonist we've encountered in this series of cases because he's not reacting emotionally. He's thinking like a lawyer. The problem is that he's thinking like a real estate lawyer, not a dam safety lawyer. He knows implied easements, prescriptive easements, riparian rights, and federal navigable waters doctrine from his property law practice. He has never read the dam safety statute's preemption provision. He has never read a Class A license's sole operator authority language in the context of an enforcement proceeding. He is bringing the right tools to the wrong fight. Walter had said, file the action. The board meeting had been on a Tuesday evening. 5 board members, Robert presiding, Aldridge present by phone, 27 residents in attendance. The board had voted 5-0 to reject the demand. Robert's 4 legal arguments presented to the board as a comprehensive defense, Aldridge confirming on the phone that the legal position was defensible and the demand's claims were contestable. The unanimous vote had the character of a board, whose president had told them the lawyers had it covered. The community meeting had followed 4 days later. All 200 units notified, held in the clubhouse's main hall, standing room only. Robert had presented the dispute to the full community from the front of the room, with the controlled authority of a former attorney addressing a client group. The demand letter's claims, the board's legal response, the 4-argument defense, and his personal assessment that Walter Greer's action was a bad faith attempt to extract a financial settlement from a community that had built its homes and its lives in good faith against a lake that had been there for 67 years. He had said, "This lake is ours. We built this community on it. We have maintained it, stewarded it, and invested in it for 22 years. A neighboring landowner does not get to hold our lake hostage because he found a regulatory technicality in a 67-year-old license. We have legal counsel, we have a defensible position, and we will fight this." A resident named Patricia Cho, Unit 151, Northeastern Arm, one of the 47 lots in the drawdown exposure zone, had raised her hand and asked, "What happens if the drawdown proceeds while the litigation is pending?" Robert had said, "We are preparing an emergency injunction to halt any drawdown pending the court's resolution of the underlying dispute. The court will not allow 200 families to be harmed while a legal technicality is being litigated." Patricia Cho had sat down. She had called Clara's office the next morning. Walter had read the community meeting summary in the county paper. Lakeview Commons HOA. President vows to fight dam owner's legal threat. At the kitchen table on a Saturday morning. He had read Robert's quote, "This lake is ours." He had set the paper down and had called Clara. He had said, "The community meeting summary is in the paper. Robert told 200 households the lake is theirs, and the board will fight." Clara had said, "I know. I read it this morning." He had said, "This one knows enough law to be dangerous. The prescriptive easement theory is the strongest argument I've seen from an HOA in any of these cases." He found the right doctrine and applied it to the wrong statute. Clara had said, "He knows real estate law. He doesn't know dam safety law. The prescriptive theory fails on the hostile element because of your maintenance log. The riparian argument fails on the preemption provision he's never read. The federal navigable waters argument fails on Greer Reservoir's physical and use characteristics. The implied easement argument fails because your log documents 22 years of reservation of rights. 4 arguments, 4 failures, all of them failing on the same underlying fact. DOL-1958-003 gives you sole authority over the gates, and your log documents every exercise of that authority since 1984. He built a sophisticated defense on a foundation the license doesn't support. Walter had said, "File the action." She had said, "Monday morning. Water rights enforcement and declaratory judgment, County District Court." And Walter, the drawdown notifications, 200 certified letters, one to each unit owner, individually, as required by the 2009 renewals adjacent property owner provision. He had said, "I'll need the mailing list." She had said, "My office will prepare it from the county assessor's records tonight. You sign the letters. We send them Monday when I file." He had gone to his desk that evening and had written the notification letter. One page, the 2009 renewals specified format, the drawdown's anticipated start date, the 5-foot pool reduction, the inspection period's minimum duration, the refill timeline, and the license provision requiring it all. He had written it once, cleanly, without apology. He had opened the maintenance log to the current page and had written, "Demand rejected, 5-0. Community meeting held. Robert Hale, HOA president, former real estate attorney, publicly stated lake is communities. Action to be filed Monday. 200 drawdown notifications to be issued Monday concurrent with filing. DOL-1958-003. Current. Reservoir, 38 feet. Gate A, closed. Gate B, closed." He had looked at the entry for a moment. He had thought about Robert Hale on the marina dock in October 2023, 200 families behind him, the reservoir at 38 feet, saying, "We built this community around this water." He had thought about his father closing the gates in 1958, the water rising for the first time, the sentence that had followed Walter for 67 years. "Keep it right, and it'll be here when you're old." He had initialed the entry and closed the log. Monday morning, 200 letters, the action filed, the 30-day clock starting. The gates would follow. The state's confirmation had arrived on a Friday morning. A single page from the Dam Safety Office's Inspection Scheduling Division, the confirmation number matching Walter's portal submission. The June inspection window confirmed. Inspector James Witt assigned. The licensed operator's compliance with the 30-day notification requirement acknowledged. Walter had filed the confirmation in the license folder and had called Clara. She had said, "The action is filed and served. Aldridge acknowledged service yesterday. The court has the case. Now the notifications." He had said, 200 letters. She had said, "My office prepared the mailing list from the assessor's records last night. 200 unit owners, individual certified mail to each, the green return receipt cards attached. Your signature on each letter. We send them today, concurrent with the filing date, so the sequence is clean. Action filed, notifications issued, 30-day clock running. Gate A opens on day 31 if no agreement is reached before then." He had driven to Clara's office at 10 a.m. and had signed 200 notification letters, the same one-page format for each. The drawdown start date, the 5-foot pool reduction, the 25-day drawdown timeline, the 5-day minimum inspection period, the 4 to 6 week refill estimate, and the license provision requiring it all. He had signed each letter with the same signature he had put on 42 years of maintenance log entries. It had taken 40 minutes. Clara's office staff had taken the stack of envelopes to the post office at noon. The fracture had begun before the post office closed. The Lakeview Commons Community Forum had been Walter's indirect window into the development's internal reaction since 2004, through the shared posts of adjacent neighbors and the county paper's community section coverage. The forum's first notification-related post had appeared at 4 p.m. on the day the letters were delivered to the development. A unit owner named Patricia Cho, Unit 151, Northeastern Arm, one of the 47 lots in the drawdown exposure zone, whose letter had arrived in the afternoon mail. Did anyone else receive a certified letter today from Walter Greer about a dam drawdown? It says the lake is going down 5 feet in 30 days for a mandatory inspection. My dock will be on dry ground. I'm calling my mortgage lender in the morning. The thread had generated 160 replies in 6 hours. Robert had posted at 8 p.m. The board is convening an emergency meeting tomorrow evening. We want every resident to know that the board is fully engaged on this matter, that our legal counsel is preparing the strongest possible response, and that the community's interests will be protected. Do not contact Mr. Greer directly. Do not contact his attorney. All communication should go through the board and our legal counsel. He had added, Do not contact your mortgage lenders until the board has had the opportunity to brief the community on the full legal picture. This situation is manageable. Patricia Cho had replied at 8:15 p.m. With respect, Robert, I'm not waiting for a board meeting to protect my family's $840,000 investment. I'm calling my lender in the morning. 41 other unit owners had liked the reply within the hour. 23 of the 47 exposure zone unit owners had called their mortgage lenders before the emergency board meeting convened the following evening. Clara had called Walter Thursday morning, 3 days after the letters went out. With the preliminary count, 7 lenders had sent written responses to the unit owners' inquiries, each response requesting documentation of the recorded reservoir use agreement, establishing the legal basis for the lakefront premium incorporated into the original appraisal and the loan underwriting. All 7 responses had used language consistent with the State Insurance Commissioner's 2018 guidance that Clara had included in the demand letter. The guidance Robert had not been prepared for because it was insurance law, not real estate law. 5 of the 7 lenders had placed the affected loans in technical review, pending assessment of the disclosed material risk. Clara had said, 5 loans in technical review in 72 hours. The 2018 guidance is doing exactly what I expected. The lenders who have compliance officers familiar with it are moving faster than the ones who have to research it. By the end of next week, I expect 12 to 15 loans in technical review. Walter had said, Robert told the community not to call their lenders. Clara had said, 23 of them called anyway. The exposure zone residents understand that their dock access and their property values are directly at risk. Robert's instruction to wait was the instruction of a board president protecting his legal strategy. The residents with $800,000 on the line are protecting their finances. Those are different priorities, and they diverged the moment the certified letters arrived. The emergency board meeting had been on a Wednesday evening. All 5 board members, Aldridge on the phone, 64 residents in attendance in the clubhouse's main hall. Robert had presented the board's legal position, the 4-argument defense, the emergency injunction being prepared, Aldridge's assessment that the injunction had a reasonable probability of halting the drawdown pending the court's resolution. He had been composed, authoritative, and precise, the former attorney presenting a legal strategy to a client group, the same register he had used at the community meeting. The fracture had been visible in the room. Patricia Cho had asked, from the 3rd row, 5 loans are in technical review. What does that mean for those homeowners right now? Robert had said, it means the lenders are reviewing the situation. It does not mean foreclosure. It does not mean default. It does not mean anything other than administrative review. Aldridge confirmed on the phone that technical review is a standard lender response to an undisclosed material risk question, and that it resolves when the underlying question is answered. Patricia had said, the underlying question is whether we have a recorded reservoir use agreement. We don't. Robert had said, the underlying question is whether Mr. Greer has the right to do what he's proposing, and that is what the court will decide. A unit owner named Thomas Webb, Unit 89, Southern Arm, not in the drawdown exposure zone, had said, if the injunction fails, the gates open in less than 30 days. What happens then? Robert had said, the injunction will not fail. The harm to 200 families is irreparable, and the court will recognize that. Thomas Webb had said, and if it does fail, Robert had said, it won't. After the meeting, 14 unit owners had approached Aldridge's associate, who had attended in person, and had asked privately whether the HOA's legal position included the possibility of a negotiated settlement. The associate had said, the board's current direction is to pursue the injunction and the full defense. Any settlement discussion would require the board's authorization. The 14 unit owners had taken the associate's business card and had not used it. They had used Clara's number, which was on Walter's demand letter, which they had each received by certified mail and kept. Clara had called Walter Friday morning and had said, 23 unit owners have now made direct contact with my office, not through the board, not through Aldridge, directly to me, asking whether a negotiated reservoir use agreement is still possible and what it would look like. I've told each of them the same thing. The agreement Walter proposed in the demand letter remains available. The board has the authority to negotiate it, and any individual unit owner who wants to communicate that preference to their board should do so through the HOA's formal channels. I'm not negotiating with individual unit owners. The agreement has to be with the HOA as the common area holder. But the fracture is real, and Robert knows it. Walter had said, "Has he called me yet?" Clara had said, "Not yet. He will." Robert had called on a Saturday afternoon, 12 days into the 30-day notification period, 18 days before Gate A was scheduled to open. The number had come through as a county seat exchange. Walter had answered. Robert's voice had the specific quality of a former attorney who had decided to make a direct call. Controlled, precise, the register of a person conducting a conversation he had prepared for. He had said, "Mr. Greer, this is Robert Hale, president of the Lakeview Commons HOA. I believe you know why I'm calling." Walter had said, "I do." Robert had said, "I want to speak to you as one property owner to another, without the lawyers in the room. What you are doing to this community is not a regulatory matter or a legal technicality. It is a direct, deliberate action that will harm 200 families who built their lives here in good faith. They bought lakefront homes. They paid a premium for lakefront access. They have maintained and stewarded this lake for 22 years. You are using a 67-year-old license to hold their investment hostage." Walter had let him finish. He had said, "Mr. Hale, I'm following the State Dam Safety Office's mandatory maintenance schedule. The drawdown has been required every 7 years under Dam Operating License DOL-1958-003 since 1958. I conducted drawdowns in 2012 and 2019. The next one is overdue. The state's scheduling notice confirmed the inspection window. I am complying with a mandatory license condition that has been in effect since before the first lot in your development was sold." Robert had said, "You filed a lawsuit the same day you sent those letters." Walter had said, "I filed a reservoir use enforcement action because your board voted 5-0 to reject a demand letter asking for the instrument that should have been negotiated before the first lot was sold in 2002. The lawsuit and the drawdown are separate matters. The drawdown proceeds on the state's schedule regardless of the lawsuit's outcome." Robert had said, "I have 18 years of real estate law practice. I know prescriptive easement law. I know riparian doctrine. I know the implied easement case line in this state going back 40 years. Your position is not as strong as your attorney is telling you." Walter had said, "Mr. Hale, you know real estate law. You do not know the Dam Safety Statute's preemption provision, which controls the riparian argument. You do not know the hostile element requirement for prescriptive easements in the context of a licensed operator who conducted drawdowns on his own schedule in 2012 and 2019 without the HOA's permission. You do not know why the federal navigable waters argument fails for a private, non-navigable impoundment. Your attorney will explain these to you. It will take him some time because he practices property law, not dam safety law. While he is explaining them, the drawdown notification period will be running." Robert had been quiet for a moment. When he spoke again, the precision in his voice had the quality of a person recalibrating. He had said, "You are going to destroy what 200 families built here. The marina, the beach, the clubhouse, the dock access, all of it. Property values will drop. Insurance policies will be questioned. Loans will be flagged. People who spent everything they had on a lakefront home will watch it become worth less because you decided to exercise a license right 67 years after your father built a dam." Walter had said, "Mr. Hale, the drawdown has been required every 7 years since 1958. The last one was 2019. This one is overdue. The marina's 18 shallow slips went dry in 2012 and again in 2019. The community beach closed both times. The clubhouse deck overlooked exposed mudflat both times. Your community has experienced this twice before. The difference this time is that 5 loans are in technical review, and 23 unit owners have called my attorney directly asking whether a negotiated agreement is still possible. The agreement I proposed in the demand letter remains available. Your board has the authority to negotiate it. The gates open in 18 days. Robert had said, 18 days is not enough time. Walter had said, "The demand letter gave you 30 days before the notification. The notification gives you 30 more days before Gate A. You have had 60 days total from the demand letter's delivery. The agreement could have been negotiated in that time if the board had voted differently. The gates open in 18 days. Robert had said, and the precision had shifted to something underneath it, not quite anger, but the specific register of a former attorney who had argued a position he believed in and is hearing the response that tells him it won't hold. "I will file an injunction before those gates open." Walter had said, "I know. Clara Venn's response will be ready when you do. The gates open in 18 days, Mr. Hale. If the board reconsiders before then, the demand letter has her number." He had ended the call and had set the phone on the desk and had opened the maintenance log to the current page. He had written, "Call from Robert Hale, HOA President, former real estate attorney, approximately 2:45 p.m. Saturday." He argued, prescriptive easement, riparian rights, bad faith. Advised, drawdown mandatory, 22 years of reservation of rights in maintenance log, defeats prescriptive claim. Dam safety statute, preempts riparian argument. Advised, injunction will fail. Gates open in 18 days. Reservoir, 38 feet. Gate A, closed. He had initialed the entry and closed the log. He had gone to the dam at dusk, the June evening warm, the reservoir still at 38 feet, the eastern arm running toward the Lakeview Commons development in the long light, the marina's dock structure visible at the southern end, the 200 docks along the eastern arm, all of it built against his water. 18 days from the gate opening that had been coming since 1958 and overdue since 2026. He had looked at Gate A's handwheel in the fading light, his father's mechanism, 67 years of closed position, 18 days. Robert had filed the emergency injunction on a Monday, 15 days into the 30-day notification period, 15 days before Gate A was scheduled to open. Clara had called Walter that afternoon. She had said, "Aldridge filed the injunction application this morning in County District Court. It's assigned to Judge Orwell, same consolidated docket as the enforcement action. The application is 14 pages, which is 3 pages longer than any injunction application I've seen in a dam dispute. Robert drafted the substance himself. Aldridge cleaned the formatting. Orwell has requested responses from both parties, the State Dam Safety Office, and the Army Corps of Engineers within 7 business days." Walter had said, "The Army Corps." Clara had said, "The federal navigable waters argument requires the Corps' position. Orwell is being thorough. She wants the relevant federal agency's view before ruling on a federal preemption claim. It's exactly the right judicial response, and it will produce exactly the result Robert didn't anticipate when he added the 4th argument to the letter. The injunction application's federal argument had been the most carefully constructed section of the document. Robert's 18 years of property law practice visible in the case citations, the doctrinal framework, the statutory analysis. He had cited the Supreme Court's navigability test under the Rivers and Harbors Act, had argued that Greer Reservoir's 22 years of recreational use by 200 households met the functional navigability standard for non-tidal waters, and had argued that DOL 1958-003's sole operator authority provision was preempted by the Army Corps' jurisdiction over navigable waters under federal law, meaning that the licensed operator's gate authority was subject to federal oversight that superseded the state license's operational conditions. Clara had said, when she walked Walter through the argument, it's wrong on 3 independent grounds. First, the navigability test for Rivers and Harbors Act jurisdiction requires that the water be navigable in fact, capable of supporting interstate or foreign commerce, connected to a navigable waterway system. Greer Reservoir is a private landlocked impoundment with no connection to any navigable waterway. 22 years of recreational use by a residential community does not make it navigable in the federal sense. Second, even if navigability were established, federal preemption of state dam safety licensing requires an actual conflict between federal and state law. There is no federal regulation that addresses the maintenance drawdown schedule for a private Class A impoundment, so there is nothing to preempt. Third, the Army Corps' Section 10 jurisdiction over navigable waters does not displace state dam safety licensing authority for private impoundments. The two regulatory systems have coexisted for 60 years without conflict because they govern different things. Walter had said, "The Corps will say all of that." Clara had said, "The Corps will say it in fewer words and with more authority." The Army Corps of Engineers Western District Office had filed its response on day 5. 3 pages, signed by the district's regulatory branch chief. The response was direct. Greer Reservoir is a private impoundment created by Greer Dam on Greer Creek, a non-navigable tributary. The reservoir has no connection to any navigable waterway subject to the Corps' Section 10 jurisdiction under the Rivers and Harbors Act. The recreational use of a private landlocked reservoir by a residential community does not confer navigable character under federal law. The Corps of Engineers has no jurisdiction over Greer Reservoir and takes no position on the operational requirements of Dam Operating License DOL-1958-003, beyond noting that the license is a state regulatory instrument outside the Corps' jurisdictional scope. The Federal Navigable Waters Doctrine does not apply to this matter. The State Dam Safety Office had filed on day 6, 4 pages, the same district director and legal counsel who had filed in the Harlan Dodd and Emmett Voss proceedings. The agency's institutional position stated, with the same flat authority. The maintenance drawdown described in the licensed operator's notification is a mandatory operating condition of Dam Operating License DOL-1958-003, required every 7 years under the license's Class A impoundment maintenance schedule. The licensed operator's obligation to perform this drawdown is non-delegable and non-deferrable without the office's written concurrence. The office has not concurred in any deferral. Under the state's Dam Safety Statute, Section 47-214, no court order may compel or prevent a licensed dam operator's compliance with a mandatory license maintenance requirement without the office's written concurrence. The office respectfully submits that the court lacks the authority to grant the requested injunction. The office's second page had addressed the preemption argument. The petitioner argues that Federal Navigable Waters Doctrine preempts the licensed operator's authority under DOL-1958-003. The office notes that the Army Corps of Engineers has filed a response confirming that Greer Reservoir is outside Federal Navigable Waters jurisdiction. In the absence of any applicable federal regulatory requirement governing this reservoir's maintenance operations, no preemption conflict exists. The State Dam Safety Statute governs. The licensed operator's sole authority over gate operations is unaffected by federal law. Judge Orwell had ruled on Thursday, 7 days after the injunction was filed, 1 day before Gate A's scheduled opening. Her order was 3 pages, longer than her prior injunction denials, because the federal argument required a written finding on the preemption claim. She had disposed of the navigable waters argument in 2 paragraphs. The Corps' response confirmed the absence of federal jurisdiction, and without federal jurisdiction, there was no federal law to preempt the state license. She had disposed of the state preemption argument in 1 sentence, citing Section 47-214. She had denied the injunction on both grounds. The drawdown would proceed on the licensed operator's schedule. Clara had texted Walter at 10 a.m. Thursday. Injunction denied on both grounds. Corps and Dam Safety Office both filed. Orwell ruled this morning. Gate A opens tomorrow. He had gone to the dam at 6 a.m. Friday. The June morning warm and clear, the North Ridge sharp against the early sky, Greer Creek running at its late spring volume, the reservoir surface still at 38 feet. He had read the staff gauge, written it in the maintenance log, photographed the gate assembly and the gauge from the inspection walkway. He had set the torque wrench on Gate A's hand wheel and had turned it counterclockwise to the quarter-open position, the gate retracting from its seat, the flow increasing through the conduit's inlet, the discharge appearing at the downstream channel as a steady current that had not run since the 2019 inspection. He had secured the wheel with the locking pin and had photographed the position and the downstream discharge. He had noted the time, 6:18 a.m. He had gone back each morning at 6 a.m. and read the gauge. Day 1, 37.4 feet, 7 inches. Gate A discharge steady. Day 3, 36.1 feet, 23 inches. The marina's shallowest slips were showing the first reduction in operational depth. The water still present, but the margin above the slip bottom visibly reduced. Walter had photographed the marina's northeastern section from his boundary fence with the telephoto lens, the slip depths estimable from the dockboard heights against the waterline. Day 5, 35.0 feet, 3 feet of drawdown. The community beach's buoy line was sitting in progressively shallower water, the inner boundary's depth approaching the county health permit's minimum. He had photographed the beach from his fence line, the buoy line visible, the shoreline's recession beginning. Day 7, 33.9 feet, 4 feet 1 inch. The county health department had posted the beach closure notice that afternoon. The automatic suspension triggered when the depth at the inner buoy boundary dropped below 3.5 feet. Walter had learned this from Dale Ingram, who had driven past the development's main entrance and had seen the closure notice on the beach access gate. He had noted it in the maintenance log. Day 10, 32.7 feet, 5 feet 3 inches, past the 5-foot target, the drawdown running slightly ahead of calculation as the late spring evaporation rate exceeded his model. He had called Witt to confirm the adjusted timeline. Witt had said, "I need 5 days at or below 33 feet. You're there now. I'll arrive Monday." Day 13. Day 12, 32.4 feet, 5 feet 6 inches below normal pool. He had driven to his eastern boundary fence on day 12 and had looked northeast across the reservoir toward the Lakeview Commons development with the telephoto lens. The mudflat margins on the 47 northeastern lots were fully exposed, the pale gray-brown lake bed extending from the original shoreline 40 to 90 feet to the current waterline, the dock structures standing on their full piling heights above the receded water, 3 of the dock's finger piers resting on dry mudflat entirely. The marina's 18 northeastern slips were dry, the slip bottoms exposed, the dock boards sitting on the lake bed, 2 boats that had not been relocated resting on their keels in the dry slip beds. The community beach was a mudflat, the original shoreline edge, the former swimming area's floor, and the current waterline forming 3 distinct zones of exposed lake bed visible from his fence. He had photographed each condition in sequence, the images dated and geotagged, and had filed them in the water systems folder. Clara had called that afternoon with the updated lender count. 19 loan files were in technical review, the count having grown from 5 on day 3 to 12 by day 7 and 19 by day 12. The progression tracking the combination of individual unit owner-lender calls and the lender's own discovery of the enforcement action in the court's public case index. The title company retained by 3 of the lenders had filed a notice of appearance in the enforcement action as an interested party, the first time in any of Walter's cases that a title company had formally intervened, its interest being the title insurance policies it had issued on the affected parcels at closing, which carried a risk exposure if the court's resolution produced a title cloud. Clara had said, "The title company's intervention is the insurance dimension making itself visible in the court record. I anticipated it. Their counsel will want to observe the hearing and potentially submit an amicus brief on the title insurance exposure. It strengthens our position. Every additional party whose interest confirms the absence of a recorded instrument is another voice telling the court that the gap is real and the consequences are real." Walter had said, 41 unit owners have contacted you privately. She had said, 41 as of this morning. The fracture is now across both the exposure zone and the non-exposure zone lots. Residents who are not in the 47 lot group are calling because the beach closure and the marina dry slips are visible from everywhere in the development. This is not an abstract legal dispute anymore. It is a visible, daily, physical condition that every resident sees when they look at the lake. The mudflat is the argument. Walter had said, "Robert." Clara had said, "He has not called since the injunction was denied. His board is still publicly unified. The forum posts are still the institutional voice. The legal defense still the official position. But 41 households are talking to me, and the board knows it. The 5-0 vote is holding in the boardroom. It is not holding in the community." He had gone back to the dam at dusk on day 12, and had stood on the inspection walkway with the reservoir at 32.4 feet below him. 5.5 feet lower than the 38-foot normal pool that 200 households had built their lives against. The eastern arm running toward the development in the evening light, the marina's dry slips visible at the southern end of the development's shoreline, the beach closed, the mud flat pale in the fading light. He had read the staff gauge one more time. He had written it in the field notebook. He had looked at Gate A's handwheel and the locking pin's secured position. Open a quarter turn, the discharge running steady in the downstream channel 60 feet below. Witt was arriving Monday. The state had looked at the license. The Corps had looked at the reservoir. The injunction had been denied on both grounds. The mudflat was visible from every window on the northeastern arm. The hearing was set for a Thursday in late August. Witt had completed the inspection on day 18, 5 days at the 32-foot level. The upstream embankment face examined from a rowboat along the full 420-foot crest length. The gate seals inspected through the conduit access ports. The spillway inlet cleared of the sediment accumulation that 7 years of normal pool operation had deposited at the Morning Glory Bell's lip. The downstream toe's seepage measurement taken at 6 monitoring points and found within the acceptable range. He had given Walter his preliminary findings on the inspection's final day on the walkway. Embankment condition excellent for a 68-year structure. No piping indicators. No anomalous seepage. Gate seals serviceable, but showing wear consistent with replacement in the next cycle. Spillway inlet clear. The formal report would follow in 30 days. Walter had noted the findings in the maintenance log and had thanked Witt, who had driven back down the ranch road without comment. Walter had closed Gate A the morning after Witt left. He had gone to the dam at 6 a.m., removed the locking pin, and had turned the handwheel clockwise. 24 full rotations from quarter open to fully closed, the gate advancing rotation by rotation until it seated against the conduit inlet, the downstream discharge reducing and stopping, the channel below the dam going quiet. He had photographed the closed position, noted the time, and written the maintenance log entry. Gate A closed. Inspection complete. Reservoir level at closure, 32.1 feet. Refill commences on natural inflow from Greer Creek. Estimated refill to normal operating pool, 4 to 6 weeks at current inflow. The hearing had been 6 weeks after the gate closure. The reservoir had been climbing back toward 38 feet on Greer Creek's summer base flow. Slowly, the inflow below its spring peak, the gauge adding 2 to 3 inches per day. By the hearing date, the reservoir had recovered to 35.8 feet, 2 feet 2 inches below normal pool. The marina's shallower slips back in navigable water. The community beach reopened under the county health permit when the depth at the inner buoy boundary had recovered past the 3.5-foot minimum. The mudflat margins on the 47 northeastern lots submerging as the waterline rose back toward the dock structures. The courtroom was the same small county district room. Sandra, Robert in this case, was in the gallery, with all 4 remaining board members, Aldridge at the respondents' table, with a water rights consultant and a property law associate. Clara sat at the petitioner's table with Walter to her left, the maintenance log on the table, the license binder beside it. The title company's counsel sat in the gallery's front row as an observing, interested party. Clara had presented in 45 minutes. She had opened with the license, DOL-1958-003 on the projector, the 1959 issuance, the 1984 operator transfer, the 2009 renewal, the sole operator authority provision read aloud in full. She had said, "This provision has been in this license since 1959. It is 67 years old. It has been renewed twice. It is a public record available on the State Dam Safety Office's portal to any person who conducted due diligence on a parcel adjacent to this dam before purchasing, developing, or financing property against this reservoir." She had moved to the maintenance log, the 2001 entry on the projector, the construction commencement notation, the decision to document and defer, the closing line, no reservoir use agreement. Then, the 2025 annual summary, the same closing line, 22 years later. She had said, 42 years of continuous documented reservation of rights. Every annual summary entry from 2001 through 2025 ends with those 4 words. The HOA's prescriptive easement theory requires hostile use without the owner's acquiescence. 42 years of maintenance log entries documenting the licensed operator's reservation of rights is the opposite of acquiescence. The 2012 and 2019 drawdowns, conducted on the licensed operator's schedule, without the HOA's permission or the HOA's ability to prevent them, are acts that are structurally inconsistent with acquiescence in a prescriptive claim. She had placed the county assessor's aggregate value analysis on the projector, the $720,000 average property value, the $144 million aggregate lakefront premium, the assessor's notation citing lakefront access and marina proximity as the primary value drivers. She had said, "This is the financial scale of what was built on an unrecorded use right. $144 million of assessed lakefront premium in the county's own records against a reservoir level that has no recorded legal instrument behind it." She had placed the drawdown documentation on the projector in sequence. The beach closure notice, the marina's 18 dry slips photographed from the boundary fence on day 12, the mudflat margins on the 47 northeastern lots, the dock structures on dry lake bed. She had said, "This is not a hypothetical harm. This is the physical consequence of the absence of a recorded instrument, documented at 12 days into a mandatory licensed maintenance operation that has been required every 7 years since 1958 and will be required again in 2033, 2040, and 2047. She had placed the lender and contact summary last. 19 loan files in technical review, 41 unit owners in private contact with her office, asking whether a negotiated agreement was still possible. She had said, "The community has already fractured along the line of the legal exposure. 41 households understand that the recorded instrument Walter Greer proposed in his demand letter is the resolution, the instrument that closes the loan files, clears the title questions, and documents the use right the community has been depending on for 22 years without legal basis. The court's order can create the framework for that instrument to be executed within the 90-day window." Aldridge had presented for 30 minutes. The 3 remaining arguments after the federal navigable waters claim had been disposed of by the injunction denial, the Corps' response, and Orwell's written preemption finding. The implied easement theory, the prescriptive easement theory, the irreparable harm claim. His water rights consultant had testified briefly on the implied easement theory. Clara had cross-examined on the hostile element. The consultant had conceded that the 2012 and 2019 drawdowns, conducted without the HOA's authorization, were consistent with Clara's argument that the licensed operator had not acquiesced in the community's use. Aldridge had not re-examined. Robert had been in the gallery's front row throughout, not as a witness, as a board officer. He had the specific stillness of a former attorney, watching a proceeding he had shaped go in a direction he had not designed for. He had written notes on a legal pad through Clara's presentation. He had stopped writing during the maintenance log section. He had not written anything after the lender's summary. Judge Orwell had asked her question during Aldridge's presentation, in the same format she had used in every prior hearing in this series. She had waited until he completed the implied easement argument, looked at her notes and said, "Mr. Aldridge, does the Lakeview Commons HOA hold any recorded instrument, any easement, any water right, any reservoir use agreement, any instrument of any kind recorded in the county deed records, establishing their legal right to the reservoir level their properties require?" Aldridge had said, "Your Honor, the HOA's position is that the combination of established use, implied easement doctrine, and the licensed operator's 22-year pattern of voluntary," Orwell had said, "recorded instrument, yes or no?" Aldridge had said, "No, Your Honor." Orwell had written a note. She had said, "Continue." She had issued her ruling from the bench 20 minutes after Aldridge concluded. The license, DOL-1958-003, was a valid state-issued Class A dam operating license, the oldest active dam license in the county, the licensed operator's sole authority over gate operations, confirmed by the State Dam Safety Office, the Army Corps of Engineers, and this court's injunction denial. The reservoir's operating level was a managed condition, subject to the licensed operator's authority under the license and the State Dam Safety Statute. The implied easement failed. No implied easement could arise against a licensed operator who had continuously documented his reservation of rights across 42 years of maintenance log entries and had conducted mandatory maintenance drawdowns in 2012 and 2019 without the HOA's permission. The prescriptive easement failed. The hostile element was not established. The licensed operator's maintenance log and drawdown history were inconsistent with acquiescence. The dam safety statute's preemption provision foreclosed prescriptive water surface claims against licensed Class A operators. The riparian rights argument failed on the preemption provision, as the court had found in the injunction proceeding. The federal navigable waters argument disposed of by the injunction ruling and the Army Corps' filed response. The order. The HOA was directed to negotiate a recorded reservoir use agreement with Walter Greer within 90 days of the order's date. The agreement to be recorded in the county deed records as a permanent easement appurtenant to the HOA's common area parcel, addressing the reservoir's normal operating pool level, the mandatory maintenance drawdown schedule, and its operational effects on the affected parcels, and fair compensation for 22 years of unauthorized beneficial use, calculated at the regional recreational impoundment rate. If no recorded agreement was executed and filed within 90 days, the court would issue a declaratory finding that all 200 Lakeview Commons lakefront parcels lacked a documented legal right to the reservoir level, incorporated into their appraised values, and that finding would be recorded in the county deed records at each of the 200 affected parcels as a title notice, a cloud visible to every future buyer, lender, title company, and insurer until a recorded reservoir use agreement was executed. She had said, "The court is aware of the financial scale of what has been built against this reservoir without a recorded instrument. $144 million of assessed lakefront premium, 19 loan files in technical review, 41 households already seeking a negotiated resolution." The 90-day window reflects the court's recognition that an agreement of this complexity and financial significance requires careful negotiation. The court expects both parties to approach that negotiation in good faith, with the understanding that the recorded instrument, once executed, protects the licensed operator's rights and the community's interests permanently. She had gathered her notes and left the bench. Walter had set his hand on the maintenance log on the table in front of him. 42 years of entries, 42 annual summaries ending with 4 words. The court order had just made those 4 words the operative fact of a 90-day negotiation. Clara had said quietly, "The title notice threat at 200 parcels. That's what moves this. Robert knows what a title cloud does to a resale." Walter had said, "He was a real estate attorney for 18 years. He knows exactly what it does." He had picked up the maintenance log and followed Clara out of the courtroom into the August afternoon. The hearing behind him, the reservoir climbing toward 38 feet on Greer Creek's steady inflow. The gates closed, the license current, the court order in the record. Robert's resignation letter went to the community forum on a Tuesday, 9 days after the judgment, 2 paragraphs. Effective immediately. Personal reasons. 6 years of service acknowledged. The second paragraph said, "I believe the community's path forward requires leadership that can approach the reservoir use negotiation without the adversarial history of the past several months. I am stepping aside so that negotiation can proceed without the weight of my prior positions." It was the most honest resignation letter Walter had read in any of these proceedings. He had read it on his phone at the kitchen table and had set the phone down and looked at the maintenance log beside his coffee. The new interim board president was Patricia Cho, Unit 151, Northeastern Arm, one of the 47 exposure zone lots, the resident who had posted the first forum reply the evening the certified letters arrived, and had called Clara's office the next morning. She had been one of the 41 private contacts. She had assumed the interim presidency the day after Robert's resignation, and had called Walter directly at 8 a.m. the following morning. She had said, "Mr. Greer, I've read dam operating license, DOL-1958-003. I read it the week after your certified letter arrived. I want to resolve this correctly, and I want to start today. What does a fair agreement look like?" He had said, 3 components: a permanent recorded easement appurtenant to the HOA's common area parcel, establishing the community's right to the reservoir at normal operating pool, the instrument that should have been in the county deed records before the first lot sold in 2002, compensation for 22 years of unauthorized beneficial use at the regional recreational impoundment rate, per the water rights economist's calculation in the demand letter, and a recorded maintenance cost share agreement incorporating the 7-year drawdown schedule, the inspection costs, the gate maintenance, the operational framework, so that the HOA's 200 households can plan around the drawdown rather than experiencing it as a crisis every 7 years. She had said, the water rights economist's figure was $178,000. He had said, that's the figure. She had said, I'll have new counsel retained by end of week. We'll be ready Monday. The negotiation had taken 5 weeks. Clara and the HOA's new property counsel, a water rights attorney named Susan Holt, the same attorney who had represented the Lakeview Shores HOA in the Harlan Dodd matter, had worked through the easement's operative provisions in 3 sessions and the compensation figure in 2. The final figure had settled at $165,000. The water rights economist's calculation, adjusted for the passive delivery discount, reflecting the absence of pumping infrastructure costs. The maintenance cost share had been straightforward, 65-35. Walter carrying 65 as the licensed operator, the HOA carrying 35 as the primary beneficiary, the costs covering WIT's inspection fees, the gate seal replacement due in the next cycle, and the embankment monitoring program's annual measurement. The HOA had wired $165,000 to Clara's trust account on the instrument's execution date. Clara had dispersed it to Walter the same afternoon. The easement and the maintenance cost-share agreement had recorded in the county deed records 4 days later, the instruments appearing in both parcel indices, Walter's 1,400-acre parcel and the HOA's 22-acre common area parcel. The reservoir use right finally documented 68 years after Walter's father had closed the gates and 22 years after the first lot had been sold against the water without it. The 19 loan files had cleared within 10 days of the recording, the recorded easement providing the documented legal basis the lenders had requested, the title company's interest resolved, the technical review flags removed from each affected loan file. The marina's 18 northeastern slips were back at full operational depth, the reservoir having returned to 38 feet on the staff gauge 3 weeks after Gate A had closed. Greer Creek's summer base flow steady through August, the Morning Glory spillway running its thin overflow arc at the normal pool elevation. Walter had walked the dam the morning after the agreement recorded. He had gone at 6:15, the September morning cool and still, the North Ridge clear, Greer Creek audible in the upstream basin. He had read the staff gauge, 38.0 feet, normal operating pool. He had looked at Gate A's hand wheel in the closed position, Gate B beside it, both gates seated. The spillway was running its overflow at the Morning Glory inlet. The surplus from Greer Creek's inflow, passing north through the discharge channel, the way it had passed since his father set the overflow elevation in 1957. He had walked the embankment crest, the full 420 feet, the earthen fill solid under his boots, the upstream face running down to the water at 38 feet, the downstream face dry and grassed, the toe undisturbed. He had looked east from the crest's midpoint, 480 acres of water in the morning light, the eastern arm running toward the Lakeview Commons development, the 200 dock structures at their waterline positions, the marina's 60 slips visible at the southern end, the community beach's buoy line set in its proper depth range, the clubhouse deck 4 feet above the waterline, where it had been designed to sit. He had pulled the maintenance log from his jacket and had written the entry at the embankment crest, September 9th, 2026. Staff gauge, 38.0 feet. Gate A, closed. Gate B, closed. Spillway, normal overflow. Reservoir, normal operating pool. Easement number 2026-RU-0144 and maintenance agreement number 2026-MA-0089, recorded September 8th, 2026. County deed records, both parcel indices. Compensation paid and dispersed. 19 loan files, cleared. Marina, fully operational. DOL-1958-003, current. He had looked at the entry. He had written the final line. Agreement recorded. Gates nominal. Reservoir at operating pool. Matter. Recorded. He had initialed it and closed the log. He had looked at the dam his father had built in 1958, the earthen embankment, the concrete spillway, the gate assemblies in the south abutment, the staff gauge at the upstream toe reading 38 feet the way it had read 38 feet on 10,000 mornings. His father had said in 1958, "Keep it right and it'll be here when you're old." He had kept it right. He went inside.